Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Business Morning, daily definitive business, investment, market, and finance business here on Channels Television, Nigeria's news leader. I am Busi Number 5. Let's get today's show started. Wednesday, the 28th of February. Nigeria's election still in everybody's crosshairs in the market, so we'll try to bring you up to speed. The state of the market as we speak. Banks yesterday buoyed Nigeria's equities market 0.67%, thanks to Zenith Bank, better than expected numbers for the full year 2018. We'll talk about a bit of details of those numbers. So investors bought not just into the Zenith Bank, but other top-tier banks, giving Nigeria's stock market a bit of a good start for Tuesday. While that is holding up in the elections week, is anybody's guess. We'll leave all of that, so we'll check in with the markets later on the show. Meantime, the central bank hit the FX market with $210 million intervention as the Naira looks for direction in trading at the I&E window. The volumes a little bit slowing about 78% on Tuesday, but the market told us this morning that there was seen a steady inflow of offshore monies into the Nigerian market despite the postponement of the general elections calendar. Meantime, the yields on treasuries contract on Tuesday as central bank did not conduct open market operations. A bit of a sell-off, however, on Naira bonds and yield expansion at the short end of the curve as the market readies for today's 150 billion debt management operations offering, and of course the maturity of nearly 600 billion naira tomorrow of dated treasuries. All of that bringing liquidity to the discuss later on the program. We'll check in with our market analyst at FMDQ Exchange Place in about 45 minutes from now. Stand by for that. Meantime, the unlisted securities composite index gave up about 0.34% of its massive north of 3% Monday's advance. That's the story from the unlisted securities market. Details with Temple Ashaju in about a minute or two. But first, international markets and investors and analysts are still checking with Nigeria's postponed elections. And this is what came in from Exotic Capital. Exotic Capital is one of the world's #1 investment banks headquartered in the United Kingdom. And this is what we got in via Twitter. Christopher Delman, who is a senior economist at Exotic, says, quote, there is some frustration on behalf of investors who have had concerns about this election for the better part of the past year and are hoping to put it behind them. Let's see whether we'll be able to put the frustrations and the delay behind us from this Saturday. Okay, let's move on. Despite the noise on the political front and all that you see on television and here on radio, the Securities and Exchange Commission is continuing its zero tolerance for Ponzi schemes to the Nigerian market. Under Mary Uduk, the head of the SEC, yesterday, the regulator clamped down on another illegal fund manager, or what you call Ponzi schemers, this time in Lagos. And the firm, of course, by the name, just give that to you here correctly. And that's Growing Circle International Limited. That's the name of the illegal fund managers that the SEC clamped down in Lagos yesterday. Just about 2 weeks ago, another illegal Ponzi scheme operator was clamped down or shut down in Kano. Now we have the first microfinance operator in Nigeria, according to the insurance sector regulator, NICOM. Says it has issued operating license to the first standalone state microinsurance by the name Gogzi Microinsurance Company Limited. Want to check out the details of that? You can find that in our news box. Meantime, the banking sector report for the fourth quarter of last year came in from the Statistics Office late yesterday. The sector report was on e-payment for the our banking sector, the size of deposits, the credit to the private sector, and the number of staffers in the banking sector. What are the key points? Bring it on, folks. Let's just I'll give you the highlights, as it were. The total credit to the private sector in the final 3 months of 2018 came in at 15.13 trillion naira, slightly below the figure for the third quarter of the same year, 2018. Oil and gas led banks' credit to the private sector, the bulk of the lion's share of banks' credit to the private sector came in 3.55 trillion naira, and manufacturing sector got much lower, 2.23 trillion naira. The total volume of transactions done on all the platforms was 616.528 million naira, and the naira value of those transactions came in at 39.15 trillion naira. In terms of those who provide the platforms for those instant payment, NIPS, Nigeria Interbank Settlement System, leads the instant payments with a figure of 23.57 trillion. In terms of employment in the banking sector, the total bank staffers increased 1.80% to 104,669 in the fourth quarter of last year, meaning the banks employed more people. Last quarter of 2018, that figure was better than the third quarter by nearly 2,000. That's about 1.8%. And that's one good news, one of the good news in that report. If you can check out the details on Nigeria's National Bureau of Statistics website. Let's check in with Temple Ashaju, our business correspondent, to start this very round of conversations. Temple, thank you very much. We got one of the big boys reporting in the banking sector yesterday. Zenith Bank is big, and we say thank you, a handshake to Jibovi and the rest of his team for helping the market make a very nice landing on Tuesday. Take it from here.
Correct, Bosun. Zenith Bank was the major driver in the markets yesterday, and of course that has given a kind of that has paved way for what we'll begin to see in other tier 1 banking names that are listed and tradable here in this market. Of course, whenever you see the likes of Zenith Bank releasing their earnings, that tells you that others are also in the works for this market. Guarantee Trust Bank will soon be releasing theirs too, and of course that will continue to drive up some gains in this market. It is really, really necessary at this point in time when we have a lot of uncertainties around the political space. Of course, what we saw yesterday in a way kind of neutered that level of risk that we've been seeing in the market. Of course, a lot of investors had priced that in to their investments in this market. So thanks to these tier 1 banks and of course a couple of other stocks that will now, or companies that will start releasing their earnings going forward. So yesterday, Zenith Bank was able to help push up the indices of the market, and of course its own sector, that is the banking names. The key benchmark index rose some 0.67%. That's 216.11 absolute points, basically. And of course, that grew the equity capitalization further by some 80.60 billion naira. We saw the month-to-date gains of the market now expanding further to 5.35%. You've got the year-to-date level also expanding further to 3.10%. And of course, we had a bit of a balanced market breadth yesterday. We got 16 gainers versus 14 losers in the system. Japol and Sovereign Insurance from the insurance segment of the market, where its key top gainers are almost 10% each for those two companies. And First Aluminium was the top loser yesterday. Transcorp, which also had its own earnings for the full year 2018 release, continues to receive a kind of cold shoulder from a lot of investors. They were disappointed in the 3 kobo declared for dividends. But if you look at the activity level yesterday, we saw an appreciable number of activity. We've got the volume rising 55% yesterday, coming in at 352.41 million units of shares traded yesterday for a value of 4.08 billion naira. And if you compare to what we had on Monday, that was 24% rise. And all that took place in just 4,549 deals. Of course, if you look at the sectors, we've got the banking sector, the consumer goods segment of the market, insurance segment of the market, which Bosun also sees as cousins to banking segments, and of course oil and gas, all doing well in the market yesterday, except for the industrial goods sector. And the industrial goods segment of the market was weighed down yesterday, 0.21% by Dangote Cement, which lost some 0.41% of its shares. But if you look at the banking segment, thanks one more time to Zenith, which gained some 5.63%. UBA, of course, a lot of investors in anticipation for what will be coming from tier 1 names, and a couple of other banking names now are bracing up for these. UBA therefore rose some 4.58%, GT Bank 3.29%, and Diamond Bank, of course, had some 2.54% in its share price. Consumer goods segment of the market, Dangote Sugar actually regained some of the losses it had on Monday, rising some 4.12% again. Presco, which has been gaining, maintained the momentum. Presco was the top gainer in the market on Monday. Yesterday, Tuesday, it rose 3.31%. Honeywell Flour also did some 2%, with Unilever as well rising some 0.46%. Insurance segment of the market, two key names also did good to that segment of the market. Custodian Insurance, which did 8.26%, and of course, Sovereign Trust Insurance. Oil and gas had Japol, which did 9.52%, and of course, that was the top gainer in the market yesterday, pushing up the price of that particular company, as well as O&O, which gained some 6.25%. Not too much around the energy market, so this makes us to move on further. Takes us to the NASD OTC, where we saw a bit of decline now. That will translate to profits taking, 0.34% decline in the US side. That's the unlisted securities index, which settled at 737.43 points. Now, recall that on Monday we had some more than 3% gains on the indices of this particular platform. And of course, that tells you that for those that had taken position when the market was losing in the preceding week, this was an opportunity for them to take position, to kind of take some profits, especially in the major names like Friesland Wamco and of course CSCS, which is the Central Securities Clearing System of the Nigerian capital markets, tradable on that particular platform. So volume yesterday was 37,770, and it was valued at just 3.63 million naira, which is quite soft. And of course, if we move further to the debt market, Bosun gave us a heads up there earlier. In terms of the bonds market now, negative outing it was yesterday on Tuesday for a lot of investors there. The market wasn't too bullish. We saw average yield broadening by some 7 basis points to 14.7%. Of course, investors have been waiting and watching to see what will happen today on the 150 billion naira that will be offered by the Debt Management Office. That's the DMO by way of auction today, 20th of February. So we saw a huge sell-off on the likes of July 2021. Of course, that had to expand by some 48 basis points. The July 2030 security too had some expansion of 9 basis points due to the sell-off we saw there. And if we move further to the long end of the curve, the 18th of March 2036 got priced at 86 naira 93 kobo because of the sell-off that we saw, of course, on that particular security. And of course, that had to expand by some 21 basis points. And that translated to the expansions that we saw at the long end of the curve, which on the average was by 6 basis points yesterday. At the debt side of the market, which is the treasury bill segment of the market, it was a bit bullish. We saw a trading day, which was bullish, of course, in the absence of the OMO auction from the central bank, which is happening the second consecutive time in the market. Monday, there was no auction. Tuesday, there was no auction. We don't know why. We're yet to find out. Of course, average yield, therefore, rose by some 26 basis points to 14.47% because a whole lot of investors had to now come back to the secondary markets, with their funds to see how they can key into that segment of the market. So we saw demand for the 23-day to maturity. Of course, that's for some securities maturing and sometimes in March. And of course, that declined by some 243 basis points. 21st of March 2019 security got discounted 9.95% yesterday, and we saw some 72.75 billion naira worth of transaction on that particular security. If you look at the deals, it was 291 deals that we had there yesterday. And going further, we saw some demand, of course, for the 100-day to maturity, which contracted by 36 basis points. The 212-day to maturity also had some contraction by 71 basis points. And all of this explains the narratives that played out yesterday at the short, the mid, and of course, the long end of the curve at the debt side of the market. But mainly, a lot of investors, a lot of traders, a lot of treasurers of banks are today watching what will happen on the 150 billion naira DMO offering by way of auction that will be taking place today. Of course, a lot of analysts have predicted that there will be 50 basis points decline in the stop rates, Bosun.
Yes, Temple, quite a lot of stories around the debt market streets today. We got a bit of a very lengthy state of the market report for yesterday. What's the outlook for today and tomorrow, Thursday, from FMDQ Exchange Place before we came in here on the program, talking about the treasury space. We're looking at about 600 billion naira maturity tomorrow. I'm sure the central bank will be ready to do a mop-up massively tomorrow. We're expecting FAC allocation as well, Temple. But again, like you rightly said, look at that treasury bond, or treasury bills page. That was triple digit for the first time this week. In fact, towards the end of last week, trading in that segment began to slow down to double digit. And now we had a massive, nearly 240 billion naira in that space yesterday. So a bit quiet, investors' appetite are coming back. Everyone is trying to look at how do we play this cool and don't allow the politicians to spoil the market with all their big bats, as you will see them on the sound bites and all of that on television and radio everywhere talking about that. So the market is a bit quiet there. That's the story this morning, Tempo. But again, let's quickly move on to the big story. When big banks like Zenith Bank reports their earnings, I'm sure everyone in the market definitely take note. That was a very big number from this bank, and you said this perhaps set a tone for others who are already holding their board of directors meeting and should be reporting at least most likely after the presidential and the legislative elections this weekend.
Correct, Bosun. You're right. This sets the tone for a lot of those names that are coming that will also start releasing their own numbers any moment from now, because they had actually priced in the fact that the election will hold on the 16th of February, and so a lot of them tried to delay the release of those numbers to periods like this later in the month of February, and of course a lot of them hoping to be released sometimes in March. But let's revisit this Zenith Bank numbers. We saw yesterday that, of course, there was a bit of decline, some 15.4% decline in the top line. But if you look at the bottom line, and of course a bit of other parts of the other metrics in the market, on the numbers, net interest income yesterday, we saw that that's actually growing some 14.58%, and that's something that really attracted a whole lot of investors. The fact that expenses had to reduce, the growth for the net interest income, for a lot of analysts that have actually digested this, we understand it's attributable to the double-digit decline that we saw in terms of the funding expenses, which of course follows the decline that we saw in the time deposits, reducing from 108.7 billion naira to some 42.2 billion naira in 2018, because it was 108 billion naira in the year 2017. That was something that really helped the earnings, which also boosted what we saw in the profit before tax, coming in at 231.7 billion naira compared to just 199.3 billion naira that we saw in 2017. And of course, that represents a 16.2% decline. But if you then look at the bottom line, which is 193.4 billion naira, that's an 11.3% appreciation.
Yes, Tempo, of course, it's a good number, but of course, we all know that 2018 was a bumper harvest for Nigerian banks when it comes to what they make on treasury bills and bonds. We know that, don't we? Last year was very sweet for them. They were lending to the government.
We do.
Almost 20%. So I'm sure Zenith Bank was one of those who enjoyed the party while it lasted, because that was a top end of double-digit yield on treasury bills last year. And of course, the central bank was buying aggressively, trying to contain all those FAC allocations, all those massive expenditure by the government in terms of salaries and infrastructure, whatever. We did a Eurobond, we did Sukuk, we did so much last year, so there was so much liquidity, and the banks were those who enjoyed that. Now, let's see how much of that comes as dividend to the shareholders who are also waiting for their own share of the pie. Let's talk about the market later. Thank you, Tempo. Let's take a big break. Everyone, when we come back, we check in with the oil market. We have quite a number of stories. What's the story for Nigeria when oil prices move up? Then you have a dollar resurgence and all that about what's the big news for some of the African producers. Some of them are our neighbors. We talk to an energy analyst when we come back from this 2-minute break.